Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a patron request from Nicole, who wanted me to watch and review the 2012 movie, When the Lights Went Out. Now, when I heard why Nicole wanted me to watch this movie that I had never heard of previously, I actually got pretty darned excited. Here's the reasoning. In the UK, we have two very famous, allegedly true poltergeist stories. One is Enfield, which is the subject of Conjuring 2, which was short-lived. The other is 30 East Drive, Black Monk of Pontefract, which has claims of continuing to this day. When the Lights Went Out is based on the true story of where the legend began. This is a typical British haunted house movie and is a decent ghost story, but is it true? So, I'm super jazzed about this. I love a good haunted house movie, and I dig the kind of, based on real stories. And it was an opportunity to learn something new. I mean, I had known about the Enfield haunting. I had watched The Conjuring 2. I had also watched and reviewed the 3-part British miniseries of the Enfield haunting starring Timothy Spall. But this one, I had never heard of. The Black Monk of Pontefract? Totally new to me. So this movie kind of follows a fairly standard formula for this type of, subgenre film. We have a family moving into a new house. It looks like a great place. They're pretty jazzed about it and their future. It's a husband, wife, and their teenage daughter. And as soon as they move in, things start kind of going weird. Things moving on their own. Family members not believing one another about, something falling down the stairs, until things finally come to a head, and it's something that nobody can really ignore any longer or blame on each other. Everybody knows what's going on. Now it's a matter of what do we do about it? As the tensions ramp up, as they seek out help from the church, as so on and so on and so on, the family becomes more fractured and the attacks get more intense. So this was written and directed by Pat Holden, which from everything that I've been able to read about this, is an extremely loose adaptation of what actually happened, or what is claimed to have happened at 30 East Drive in Pontefract, West Yorkshire. And overall, as a movie, I would say that it was fairly competent. It was okay. Like I said, it's a pretty standard formula. So by the time we do get to 2012 and we have a pretty middle-of-the-road entry into it, I would say that it's probably something that is going to be a little bit forgettable. But it certainly wasn't a bad movie. This was shot very well. It had some good polish to it, some decent cinematography, lovely little crane shots, good depth of field. Overall, it looked like a quality production. As far as what the story went through and the characters went through, the biggest problem that I had with this movie, and again, it didn't make it bad, it just made it kind of uninteresting, is it didn't seem like the characters themselves really went through a whole lot, with this being the backdrop. And that's something that kind of happens a lot in these movies, that becomes the central core storyline point of this haunting. The haunting kind of becomes a little bit of the background. It's the catalyst. It's what's happening to them, while at the same time, more what we're doing is we're actually exploring these characters, what fracturing is actually happening amongst them and internally amongst themselves individually, and how that kind of butts heads with one another. As they continue down this path of growth in this conflict that's happening, we learn more about them and they learn more about themselves. And that really wasn't very present in this one. We had the father character kind of go through his thing with alcohol and trying to numb the pain of what's going on, but it really didn't lead anywhere. It kind of just dipped its toes in periodically, made some mentions of it from passers-by at the bar. Never really actually amounted to a big character conflict or any kind of growth or overcoming things. Same with the mother character, as far as her not wanting to actually leave the house or move out. It kind of established as far as why they didn't just pack their bags and go, as a combination of a lack of options. This is something that, they just didn't have the resources to do this, as well as her kind of digging her, heels into the ground, not wanting to actually leave. She just wanted to not move. The idea of moving would break her heart, so it kind of turned into an unstoppable object meeting an immovable wall kind of thing. And as far as the teenage daughter, she was pretty much the main character focus of this film. A lot of this centered around her, what she was going through, and the conflicts that was happening as far as her family not believing her at first, and going through the changes that she did, all the while continuing to just get on. Constantly blamed, constantly not believed, constantly slapped in the face. This was just a harrowing experience to watch her go through. And I thought it was probably the most interesting character aspect of this film, and I thought this young girl of the Sally character was actually played fairly well by Tasha Connor. Everything else seemed a little bit paint by numbers and just kind of going through the same old formula that these movies often do, but I still enjoyed it. I didn't regret the watch at all. It just wasn't anything that really stood out above and beyond. As far as whether or not this story is true, and even pulling back from the movie and just getting to the source material of 30 East Drive of Pontefract, I am eternally a skeptic. I think it's kind of interesting that we're taking these concepts like the Enfield haunting and the Black Monk and even Amityville horror, and a lot of these I don't think is necessarily that big of a coincidence that it's all kind of based in the early to mid 70s. As far as whether or not these things actually happened on a supernatural level, I honestly just don't think it's something that we're ever going to know for 100% certain for a number of reasons. Number one, it's almost 50 years ago, and even, taking stuff that is verifiable that actually, we have the known outcomes of them, true crime stuff. There's still a lot of missing pieces in a lot of these crimes, and the further away from those crimes that we get chronologically, the more that the chances are we'll never actually know, just because stories change, evidence degrades, so on and so forth. Not to mention, I am, like I said, eternally a skeptic. I don't necessarily choose not to believe, I just choose to need substantial evidence. I do follow that maxim of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And the fact that the evidence, if there is any, is deprecating out with every passing year, I don't think that anything's really going to come forward that is going to meet that criteria of extraordinary evidence that really locks it in place for me. As far as why I think that it's a little suspect as far as it being set in the 70s, well, that largely comes down to this. This actually gets touched on, especially like in the Enfield situation, is, when The Exorcist came out, first published in 1971, the movie came out in 1973, there was kind of a simultaneous two-part thing that happened. One is the entire world started taking on demon, poltergeist, exorcism, a certain level of fandom. It was just like this huge explosion of this cultural event that started happening and putting these kind of haunting events and supernatural events on the tip of everybody's tongue. And then the natural evolution of that is point number two, people coming up with claims of their own. Now, whether or not this is actually something that is, it's correlation versus causation. Did this cause people that now have this story just on the tip of their tongues and in the forefront of their minds to come up with stories of their own? Or did it give them the vocabulary to finally put words to this kind of nameless event that may be happening to them and their families and their households? It's anybody's guess, and it's a little bit difficult to really nail down, and I do kind of fall back on Carl Sagan's words and my personal maxim on this.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
So the possibility is always open to me that at some point evidence could be presented to me that is verifiable, peer-reviewed, and repeatable. I just haven't seen it yet. So the skeptic in me stays alive, while also at the same time, I refuse to actually dismiss evidence out of hand. It's a little bit of a wide swath of gradient between black and white, and we all have our own place on it. Nevertheless, I do find stories like this fascinating, and I do love a good haunted house story, haunted house book, haunted house movie, and I love being exposed to these kind of things and doing this kind of research and looking into the Black Monk of Pontefract and finding out the tale of the story. I really dig these things, and I think a lot of that is kind of born from this book, The Haunted, which I read when I was a teenager and I fell in love with, and it hasn't really held up over time, but it's based on the supposedly true story of the Smurl family and Ed and Lorraine Warren's investigation into their issues. Like I said, the book really doesn't hold up that well over time, but it did spark something in me that has grown into a lifelong love of these kind of stories. So based on that alone, I'm very happy to have watched and reviewed When the Lights Went Out. So thank you, Nicole, for bringing this one to my attention. I'm very happy to watch it, and I do recommend it to folks that are wanting a fairly benign, nothing extraordinarily special, but a good way to kill a Friday night with a halfway decent ghost story. type movie. And with that being said, I think it's time to close this out. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you on my next review. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to keep these videos going and supporting my channel, there's a number of ways to do that. One is a super thanks down below, and also possibly consider joining my Patreon. We have watch parties, Discord benefits, weekly vlogs, and a whole lot more, starting at only $1 a month. For less than the price of a cup of coffee a day, you can support me and my channel. So that should about do it. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.